This is Frank Rolfe, and for the next 20-30 minutes, I'm just going to tell you real simply why I got into the mobile home park business, why I stay in the mobile home park business, and where I see the mobile home park business heading into the future. Like most people, I got in the business completely accidentally. I never grew up thinking mobile home park. I never lived in a mobile home park. I never knew anyone who owned a mobile home park, and never really even had the idea of ever driving into a mobile home park till I was in my late 20s with the billboard company that I had started out of college. I built 2 billboards on a park, and they're still there. It's called Glenhaven Mobile Home Park on Interstate 35 south of Dallas. And from those 2 billboards I built on that park sprang my entire mobile home park career. Now, the park I built on, Glenhaven, was an old rundown park, about 83 lots, maybe 40 occupied. Most of the tenants in the park either lived in old park-owned homes, or as the owner called them, park-owned coaches. Some lived in RVs. It was a motley group. And so the way I got affiliated with the park initially was I built these 2 billboards in the park, and the owner of the park, whose name is Ron, he would call me up and asked me to do him a favor periodically. It was always the same favor. The favor was the manager would not answer the phone. He'd been trying to call him for days. He won't answer the phone. Could I please go over and find out why the manager will not answer the phone? That was the deal. So normally the way it worked is I would go over, I would knock on the door, the manager would, after a couple minutes, open the door, completely hungover, in his underwear, and I would say, hey, Ron wants you to call him. That was my whole gig. That's all Ron wanted me to do. Then the manager ultimately would call Ron, apologize for all of his transgressions, say he would never get drunk or be in jail or whatever the reason was this time, and that he would always answer the phone. And of course, maybe 60 days later, Ron would call me, can I please see why the guy won't answer the phone? So it was a pretty regular thing for me, when I was in the southern part of Dallas, would be to go by the park at Ron's request and find out why the manager would not answer the phone. So that was my first time ever in a park, my first time ever even thinking of a park as a business model. But after I built the billboards in the park, one factual item really struck me, and that was how few mobile home parks there were in Dallas. That was the first time I ever really thought maybe this business isn't as crazy looking as me knocking on the door of the manager's house. You see, in Dallas, which is a pretty big city, right? One of the top 10 cities in the US in size, dealing in the billboard business, I was dealing all the time with zonings, because billboards can only go on certain zonings. And I noticed there was one zoning that was more rare than any other zoning. You know, sure, there's rare zonings, there's cemetery zoning, veterinary clinic zoning. That, again, that's very rare. But the rarest zoning I ever saw in Dallas was an MH zoning. You never saw mobile home zoning. It just was very, very, very rare. Now, you know, I went to Stanford in economics, didn't pay attention all the time, wasn't the world's hottest student, didn't make straight A's, but I think I kind of came away from that with a knowledge of supply and demand. And the fact that there were very few parcels zoned mobile home, to me, triggered that siren that maybe there's a supply and demand issue going on. Because here's this giant city of Dallas, and only this little tiny bit that's zoned for mobile homes. So that was the first time I actually, as a business concept, got interested in it. But again, back then I was still in the billboard business, and so wasn't thinking about anything else, just focusing on billboards and just thinking about things while I'm driving around. After I sold the billboard business, however, suddenly the whole mobile home thing re-intrigued me. You know, I got to thinking, what other businesses have I seen, what other investment ideas are out there that I find interesting? You know, when I first sold the billboard business, I got calls at the wazoo from all the regular people who call you, stockbrokers and real estate brokers, and they would pitch all these ideas to me, none of which sounded in any way like ways you can make any money or even get your money back, to be honest with you. I mean, I had a guy call me up once with a duplex in Highland Park. You know, he wanted $750,000 for this duplex, and the cap rate was maybe 1% if it needed no repair and maintenance. It made absolutely no sense at all. And I said to the guy, well, this doesn't make any sense. And he's like, well, no, you don't understand real estate. It's always going up. Well, thank God I didn't listen to that guy, because I would be completely bankrupt by now, as many people are and were during that period. So I'm looking for something that's new and different and seemingly has a future and is worthwhile. And that led me around to mobile home parks. Now, mobile home parks, to me, at that time in history, were a little scary. They were a little freaky. But my very first park came with an incredibly attractive mechanism. The way I structured it with Ron was that I bought the park for $400,000 with only $10,000 down, and he carried $390,000 non-recourse. Had he not been willing to do that, I'm not sure I would have had the guts to get into my very first parks. I didn't know anything about the park business at all. So here I am, I've bought this park. I don't know a thing about the business other than there's very little mobile home zoning in Dallas, and it looks kind of intriguing to me. It's a different kind of business, and let's be honest, it's kind of, in its own way, sexy because it's such unexplored territory. It's kind of like being Daniel Boone walking out into the great American wilderness. So I'm thinking, I'll go to this park. If I don't like it, I'll just give it back to Ron, and I'll lose my $10,000, but it'll be a good learning experience for me. So I show up out at the park, and there's this little tiny single wide at the park, and that's the park office. So I go to the little park office, which is just this old, beat-up single wide, with like a metal desk, and just looks awful. And that's where I learned the mobile home park business initially. I was in that little single wide. I would go there every day from 9 to 5, from 8 to 6, and being there mano a mano with the tenants in that park. And it was a very rough and tumble crowd. This is a park in which they had a wrestling ring. They had built in a corner, and on Saturdays they actually had amateur wrestling and concession stands. Without Ron's knowledge, without Ron's authorization, they just had these Saturday night wrestling matches. So I'm at this park, it's rough and tumble, and the first thing I notice that makes me kind of like the business is when I think I need to fill up these vacant homes, right? The park has got several vacant homes. And what do? Well, I just run a simple ad in the paper. And my simple ad says, mobile home for rent, and a price point, can't remember what it was back then, maybe $3.95 a month, and my phone number. And I run ads in classifieds before for things like cars and stuff. I didn't expect to really get that much activity. But I was hoping after 30 days, maybe I'd get a call or two and I could rent the mobile home. Well, I run the ad, and almost immediately my phone rings off the hook. Very first day I get 20, 30 calls. It's insane. So many calls that by 10 o'clock that night I turn the phone off because I don't want to get calls all night long. And within a day or two I have the home rented. So that was the first big wake-up call to me. You know, I knew that zoning was scarce, and I knew that you could get non-recourse debt. That was kind of neat at that point. But one big epiphany for me was the amount of demand there was for this product, because I had never lived in one. I wouldn't want to live in one. So I didn't think it was that hot a product. But I run this ad, and suddenly it's the hottest product I've ever sold in my entire life. So why was that? Well, it's because, again, there was just a supply and demand shortage. Dallas, Texas, not a lot of apartments you could go out and rent for what was then $395 a month. Market back there in apartments would probably be $600 a month, something like that, $600-700 a month. So there was just this huge supply and demand differential. So again, I'm liking the business. Now, the next epiphany I had was when I started raising the rents at Glenhaven, right? When I bought it, the lot rent was relatively low, and I cannot remember the rent at that time, but I want to say it was in the hundreds. It was like 150 or something. And now I'm in the saddle, I got the park, I'm in the little single wide, I've cleaned up all the debris, I've fixed the broken windows in the laundry building, I've fixed the roof, I've painted the building, I've mowed the grass. You know, I've started renting the homes out, but now it's time to start raising the rents, because clearly I do some comps, and the other parks, well, they're all way higher than I am. But I'm terrified. If I raise that rent, will all these people run off? You know, I have all these worries. I mean, if I raise the rent even a little tiny bit, will the 40 or so people I have in there, will they all just skedaddle? And I'll go from 40 occupied down to 10, in which case, oh, I'm going to be giving the park back to Ron. So, a little worried, but I go ahead and do it. I raise the rent, and I can't remember the first jump what it was, if it was $25 or $50. But regardless of what it was, I didn't lose anybody. Didn't lose one customer. Nobody said to me, hey Frank, you scumbag, I'm out of here. I've got this other deal over here, and it's way better than your park. Not one person came to me and did that. So what was the lesson learned there? Lesson learned was, hey, you can raise rents in parks pretty easily without a lot of pushback. That was kind of neat. You know, when I was in the billboard business, if you pushed the rents, it was a catastrophe. But here I was able to push the rents up, and no one really complained about it. Now, shortly after that, I've got all my homes occupied, I've raised the rents, it's time to fill the vacant lots. So I want to go buy some homes to bring into the vacant lots. Well, I've never bought a mobile home in my entire life. No idea what they cost. And what I find is that the homes are pretty cheap. I'm able to go out in the marketplace and buy homes for $5,000, $10,000 back then. Pretty decent homes. So that was another epiphany. It was like, wow, I can buy a mobile home for not much money. I was thinking they were $50,000 or $60,000. I didn't know what they were. I never expected $5,000 and $10,000. So that was a real eye-opener. Another big eye-opener was when I went to move the home I bought, right? When I got my first home and I bought it from a broker. It's a guy back in Dallas, there was a guy who had like a little acre of land, and he had about 10 or 15 old beat-up homes out on this acre. So I went out there and picked the best of the beat-up homes, and now I got to move it. Well, that part's not cheap, right? So to move the home from that little lot over to my park, well, now you're talking, even back then, it was like $2,000 approximately. Plus I had to hook up the water and the sewer and the skirting. So next thing you know, I'm in at $3,000 plus. Well, that's another epiphany for me. You know, I was always told mobile homes, what are they? They're mobile. I thought they must be cheap to move. They're not cheap to move at all. So again, I liked that. That meant that I couldn't just freely have my customers at no cost to them move out of my park to somebody else. So I came to find out rapidly that the word mobile is a misnomer. It is not a mobile home. In fact, it's just about as permanent as a stick-built home, if you really look at it, because the ratio of cost to move that mobile home from point A to point B is about the same as moving a stick-built home from point A to point B based on a ratio of the overall cost of the home. So, I'm learning different things and I'm liking the business. So far, everything that I'm doing is falling right in line with something I like. Well, now I've got that first park, Glenhaven, where it's all the empty homes are full. I've raised my lot rent. I'm bringing in homes. Everything's going good, and it's time to think about, do I stop here, or do I go on to try and buy another park? I mean, was my deal with Ron, was it a fluke? Yes, I knew Ron from all those years of working with him, building the billboards, doing errands for him. But was that just a one and done deal, or was there a bigger future? Didn't really know. So I started to go look at that number 2 park to buy. Got park number 1, can I find park number 2? Well, that was another epiphany for me. There were a lot of parks for sale. This was not something where I couldn't find any parks to look at. I found some parks pretty rapidly to look at. Now, then, I found some parks, but can I buy any of these parks? Are any of these parks reasonably priced? Can I get financing on them? Well, again, I found a lot of sellers were like Ron. A lot of these moms and pops, they just wanted to sell their park. They were getting old, they were getting tired of it, didn't want to run it. More than happy to sell it to me as the new guy, and sell it to me not only at a good price, but to carry the paper on it. So for my first 5 parks, I totally escaped banking, loan committees, anything like that. I was able to simply go to mom and pop, buy the park, have them finance it. So that was another huge epiphany for me, that there was a big wide world of parks out there, just like the one I bought from Ron, that required not a huge amount down and non-recourse financing from the seller. So I got to escape the entire banking issue and all of the grief that goes with banking and credit analysis and loan committees and all that kind of stuff. So that's how I got the business. That's why I liked the business. That's why I kept growing in the business. Now you fast forward to today. Today we've got about 6,000 lots. We're spread out over almost 17 states. So we've basically been doing the same thing over and over and over again now for almost 2 decades. And I've never really had any second thoughts or thought, wow, maybe this was a bad idea any time during that whole period. And why is that? It's because the very factors that drew me into the business also insulated me in a lot of ways from the real estate downturn and the U.S. economic recession downturn that occurred 5 years or so ago. Now, you know, a lot of people who've not been in the mobile home park business, they think of the great bubble bursting on real estate and they think all of it was all lumped in the same category. Well, it's not true. You know, for every single family home out there that went upside down and is sitting there today waiting to be foreclosed on, you did not have a mobile home park that matched that. Most of your mobile home parks, in fact, have been doing just fine throughout this entire real estate bust cycle. And why is that? It's because mobile home parks deal in affordable housing. In fact, at some point, I'm hoping the industry changes the name and gets rid of the whole mobile home, manufactured home, all of those names, just throws that in the trash can and replaces that with the meat and potatoes of what we're doing, which is affordable housing. Because that's really the business we're in. We're not about mobile homes, homes that are on wheels that can move. It doesn't matter whether they can move or not, because once they arrive at the park, they never move again. So our emphasis needs to shift over to the idea of affordable housing. Let's go over affordable housing for a second and why that's such a big deal. You know, about 20% of all U.S. households right now are trying to make do on $20,000 a year or less. You know, it's not a statistic that the government likes to tell people because it doesn't make our nation look very good. So they never want to talk about that. We always talk about the top 1%, and in the paper you read all these folks out there, Rihanna and CEOs making $1 million and $10 million, $100 million, like there's just no end to how profitable and affluent we are here in the U.S. But you know, that's not really true. About 20% of the U.S., 20% of families are trying to live on somewhere between minimum wage and $10 an hour. So what do they do for housing? You're making 20 grand a year, you're married, you have 2 kids. What do? Where do you live on 20 grand? Well, you can't live in a stick-built home, that's for sure. Average U.S. stick-built home price right now is $200,000. Well, you're not going to make that happen on 20 grand a year. Even if you were willing to put all of your income into that home payment, you still won't pull it off because the lenders won't loan you money. So stick-built, not an option. Let's look at apartments for a minute. The average apartment rent in the U.S. last year was over $1,000 a month. It's not going to work on 20,000 bucks. You can't pay 12,000 in rent before utilities on 20,000 bucks. Not going to happen. So where can you live on something that will work? Well, what does work? If you make 20,000 a year, the government would tell you you should only be spending maybe a quarter to a third of your income on housing, right? So what does that leave you? It leaves you a budget of about $500 a month. That would be basically 30% of $20,000 a year. Where can you go on $500 a month? Can't go to any apartments. The apartments you can go to are horrible. Those apartments would be so scary you'd be afraid to get out of your car. So what else is there? Well, you can live with mom and dad. You live with grandma, but that's not very good. That's not really a very good long-term idea. The only option you have other than that are mobile home parks, where you can actually live for about $500 a month. So basically what you have is a huge slug of America. Roughly 8% right now of America lives in mobile homes. And an even bigger slug of America will have to live in mobile homes because they don't really have any other option. There was a webinar done, kind of an interview with Warren Buffett here, I don't know, 6 months ago or something, maybe longer than that. And Buffett talked all about his concepts on household formation and how screwed up things are, right? I mean, every year we have high school seniors graduating. Where do they go? What do they get for jobs? I mean, don't go to college, you end up getting a minimum wage job. So now you're working at Taco Bell. Where do you live? What do you do? Can't buy a stick built, can't get an apartment. Only option is really a mobile home or living with your parents. Even if you go to college, you get a degree in philosophy, sociology, whatever the case may be. I have lots of neighbor kids in the same predicament. They got great college degrees from some great universities, but what do you do with it that pays any money? I mean, those same kids are now, they're not working at Taco Bell, but they're working at the concierge over at the hotel downtown. It doesn't make any money. It might make 25, 30 grand a year. So again, what are all these young people going to do? Where are they going to go? You know, those of us who are baby boomers like myself, we profited by the big real estate run-up, right? So if you bought anything, a condo or a house or anything, back in the day, it's appreciated in value, and yes, you can go buy a stick-built home probably. But what about those other generations? Not the boomers, but Generation X and Y and all those guys. I don't even know what they call the new generation. I don't know where they go. But the bottom line is a big slug of America cannot afford traditional housing choices other than mobile home park. So that's one big reason that Dave and I still feel strongly about the business, maybe more strongly today than we did a decade ago, is because of affordable housing and the fact that the number of people not earning a lot is growing every day, right? I mean, I remember back as a kid in the 60s, and seemingly everything was going great in America. You had people working at car manufacturing plants and service jobs, and like everybody that I grew up with, there was never any talk about unemployment. There was never any talk about how they're going to pay their bills because there were lots of really high-paying jobs everywhere. That's all gone now, right? All those plants are closed. Talk of the town when you're with your neighbors and your friends, there's always someone out there struggling to make ends meet, to pay the rent, to provide a decent life for their family. We see that as only getting worse. We don't think that we are turning the corner as a nation on income. We don't think that the guy making $7.25 right now minimum wage is going to be making $15 next year. We don't see that. So we think affordable housing is a giant growth industry. Maybe it's sad, maybe it's bad that our country is not doing as well as maybe it should. But nevertheless, we see affordable housing as being a big part of America going forward. We don't think that affordable housing will be disappearing anytime soon. So that keeps us really intrigued and interested in the industry, right? We think the business is better today than it was 5 years ago, which is better than it was 5 years before that. So that's why I got in the business and why we've stayed in the business, is because every step in the road as I learned the business was better than I figured. There was never that one epiphany where I thought, oh my gosh, I forgot this one item. Oh my Lord, I got to unload my holdings quick. It's never happened. Every new thing I learned was a positive. And now with the economy tanking, it's an even bigger positive than it even was when I started out. Now, where do I see things going in the future? Like, you know, where is this industry heading? Well, I think it's only going to get better. I think affordable housing will just continue to grow. I don't see our country suddenly doing a right angle turn and everyone being all rich again. I don't see it. So I think affordable housing is going to be a big thing for as far as I can see out into the future. Definitely even after I'm dead. Affordable housing will still be a giant topic in the U.S. How do we provide housing for people who are making $20,000 a year or less in income? I think that's going to be a big continual news story. I also think that there are other factors at play that will continue to make this business better going forward. One is the fact that business is becoming every day more institutional. And by that I mean, as more large players buy parks, as more lenders make loans on parks, everyone's learning about the business and getting a little bit more comfortable with it. We see that right now in lending. We see lots of banks that didn't really do a lot of it saying, wow, this business makes really good credit loans. Let's make more loans on mobile home parks. So we think that in the future, 10 or 20 or 30 years from now, what you're going to find is an industry that has grown from its infancy, of back when I was in the single wide at Glenhaven, to something where it's much more mainstream. Something where lots of real estate folks who today only do apartments and retail, some of the larger outfits starting to do mobile home parks. Perfect example is Sam Zell himself. And Sam Zell, the billionaire investor out of Chicago, was a big player in apartments. Today, he's an even bigger player in mobile home parks. Largest mobile home park owner in the U.S. through Equity Lifestyle, the public company ELS. So look at manufacturing. We've gone from Jim Clayton to Warren Buffett. So we're seeing basically an industry grow up. And that's kind of neat. And we don't see it getting more adolescent going forward. We think it will continue to grow and mature and be a safer and better thought of investment in the investment community going forward. So 50 years from now, Dave and I think that mobile home parks will be just as big a standard out there in the world of investing as apartments and retail and such. So we only see the industry getting better as it goes forward than it is today. Now, what could scuttle it? Well, the factors that we see as risk factors to scuttle it are, in our opinion, kind of hard to imagine. The biggest factor would be if suddenly we were all rich. Suddenly, if every man, woman, and child inherited a ton of money, every job that was minimum wage is suddenly replaced with a great paying job. That would be a great utopian society, but I don't think it's going to happen. I would put the probability of that as a very tiny little shred, a little tiny bit. I mean, 1/1,000,000th of a percent maybe. So we don't see that risk happening. The other big risk in the industry would be if suddenly all the cities said, hey, we love mobile homes, let's go wide open, let's rezone the whole town mobile home. Again, I don't think so. Been doing this business almost 20 years. Every city I go to today respects the fact that the park is there, respects the fact that there are people who need to live in a park, but they have no interest in expanding that existing park, much less opening it up for more parks. So we don't really see the supply and demand issue changing, and we don't really see the demand issue changing based on incomes. So we don't really see any risks to this industry just getting better going forward. Now, how can you get in this industry? You know, I got in the industry through my weird roundabout way at old Glenhaven, but how does everybody else get in it? Well, you know, you have to start somewhere. You have to start A, with learning the industry, and B, finding that park to buy. Learning the industry, as you probably know, on Mobile Home University and Mobile Home Park Store, you'll see banner ads for the course that Dave and I wrote, the book that we wrote, the boot camps that we do periodically throughout the year. It's about the best place to learn the industry because everything we do is fact-based. We don't have any upsell. We don't do the things other folks do that sell things on real estate. Ours is just basically just the straight facts as we see them. It's all material we've written as a hobby over all the years. So that's a great place to learn about the industry. As far as finding mobile home parks, again, mobilehomeparkstore.com, LoopNet, there's normally 1,000 parks online for you to look at right there alone. There's a giant list of brokers. Each broker's probably got 5 or 10 pocket listings of deals that he has. So there's no shortage of deals out there to look at. The third factor is just making offers. It's a super important item that everyone has to first get over the hurdle of doing. You have to get knowledgeable on the industry, find the parks, but you're nothing, even if you complete those 2 steps, till you start actually making legitimate offers. There's plenty of parks out there to buy. There's becoming more and more financing available, and there's still plenty of moms and pops who are willing to carry the paper on the transaction. So that's kind of how you get into it. You have to learn about it, you have to see what's out there, and then you have to start making offers on that. Now, there's one final factor I want you to think about, which is what's the window of opportunity on this business? Like, when is the window going to close? And, you know, how does it work? Well, you know, one big thing that makes the window go up and down is financing. There was a crash in the credit markets 5 years or so ago. Conduit debt kind of died. And so it was really hard to buy a park because unless you had seller carry, unless you had lots of cash, you couldn't get a loan. So that was one window, but there's an even bigger window. That was just like one little window pane in the big window. The big window are all these moms and pops. Every time a park is sold from a mom and pop to a more professional investor, what happens is they clean up the operations, so there's just not as much juice in there for you to squeeze out when you buy the park, right? Now, on the plus side, when investors such as Dave and I buy a park, and then when we resell it, we've gotten rid of all the horrible turnaround issues, right? We've gotten rid of all the lousy tenants and the bad pays and the physical issues with the park. So the parks we sell, we call stabilized with upside. Basically, there's more higher places you can take the income, but you don't have any of the really awful early on turnaround issues that you have to deal with, right? The other issue is as people, you know, as the moms and pops are exhausted, those new buyers, they can't normally carry the paper because they have bank debt themselves. So really the biggest window there is how long all these moms and pops still have all their parks. And let's be honest, the moms and pops are not getting any younger. The average guy we buy a park from is a World War II or Korean War veteran. That's probably the #1 profile of a lot of these sellers. These are guys that came back from the war, real handy, lots of skills. It's the greatest generation, the folks who built most of America. They come back and they want to build stuff. And a lot of those guys went out and built mobile home parks back in the 60s and the 70s. So those guys today are how old? They're 70, 80 years old. So we see that window, that giant window, not the little financing window, that little pane that opens and closes, but the big window of having, a life left on it of maybe 5 to 10 years. At some point, all those original moms and pops will sell out. They'll either be sold through their estate, or they'll finally get old enough they don't want to deal with it anymore and they'll sell it themselves. Any way you cut it though, it's a window, it's not perpetual. So really, if you're thinking about getting in the business, you need to hurry. This is the best time you'll ever see to do it, because you still have a very large number of moms and pops out there selling these mobile home parks. And that's one of the most important pieces of the opportunity in this business, as it was when I bought my first park from Ron. So again, this is Frank Rolfe. Just wanted to give you a quick overview of how I got in the business, why I stayed in the business, and where we see the business going into the future. We think it's a great business, and we prove that by spending our entire life devoted to it. So thanks for taking the time to watch me, and hopefully hear from you soon. Thank you.